Just to introduce you to myself and the meeting, my name's John Hannon. I'm the Chief Executive of GMCVO, and we've organised this event that's part of a wider week of action. I'll just give you a bit of an introduction to this before handing over you to the people who actually know what they're talking about, some of these issues. So GMCVO, along with a number of organisations, are working together at a Greater Manchester level through the VCSE leadership group to try and promote work to make a more inclusive economy. And just to give you a very brief explanation, we're going to be talking more in depth about a range of these issues, is that sense that the economy isn't working for everybody, and the people who are actually losing out the most are the people who are more marginalised and have disadvantage, and recognising that a lot of the times that this happens is because discrimination shapes life chances, and that shapes people's engagement with the economy. So whether that's racism, patriarchy, class structures, ableism, ageism, there's all sorts of forms of discrimination that unfortunately too many to list, that actually shape people's lives and shape people's life chances and put people on the wrong end of power. And that sense of we can have a better economy, we can do something to change the economy, but it needs communities to be more in control, in our view. And we've set this session up as our community is an essential part of a thriving economy. We think we know the answer to that, and I'm hoping we're not massively surprised by the answer that comes from our panelists. So there's a bit of a spoiler there. And just in terms of why we created this week of action, it's the sense that to really change the way the economy is structured, it needs to change the way society is structured. We can't just flick a switch and we get widespread change. We need greater momentum and a greater range of change to occur. We believe that there's a lot of good work that's happening in communities to actually give people more of a say in what goes on. And while all these things can make people's lives better at a local level and may not be able to change the world, what they do show is a real sense of what the future can be, what might be possible. They're all kind of experiments in living that show us what could happen if we were all able to get involved in a piece of work like this. So we've got a massive range of projects and schemes and organisations we showcase in this week. And that sense of each of these is gives us a sense of what is possible within communities. And if we had some of these activities that are happening in our communities, in every community, we'd have we're living in a much more inclusive and a much more equal world. And what we also recognise is that even the government's recognising that the economy is not working for everybody. If you look at the Levelling Up white paper that has had a certain level of criticism, there's a kind of 150-page history lesson, which I'm sure we've all read, about why the government thinks some of the challenges to the economy exist. So we're not dealing with something that's a massive conflict in that sense of the economy isn't working for everybody, but there's different views. And I think what we wanted to show as well is a different range of views than the government's had it say. So what are the other voices saying about how we can actually change the economy and what a good economy looks like. So to guide us through a range of conversations today and give us a sense from some people who are working on the ground who really know what's happening, I'm going to be handing over in a moment to Stuart MacDonald, who's a director of CLES, a think tank that works nationally, but it's based in Greater Manchester, who look at those kind of community and local economic strategies to help us guide us and get a sense of what's really needed for a community ownership to really flourish, and a range of people that Stuart will be introducing to give their own perspective. What I'd quite like people to do is, as this event goes on, do use the chat function, ask questions, make observations, and we'll be pulling together a list of questions for panelists to answer at the end of the day. But as I say, even if you just have an observation, just do put something in chat and we might be able to construct a question out of it. But also, if you don't want to share a particular question or a point of view, if you make a direct message using the chat function to Beth Sharrett, who's one of our colleagues at GMCVO and has helped lead this work and organise this week, then do that, and we can then pass that on to Stuart when he chairs the panel discussion at the end of the more structured session. So hand over to Stuart to get us kicked off with the show today.
Thank you very much, John. Now we've got a couple of hours and we've got 3 panelists. I'm going to start off with a little bit of framing of the work that I do at CLES and the area of work around community wealth building. And for us, that very much sets a a framework in which community ownership can thrive. But what I'm going to ask each of my panelists is to explore how that needs to be further developed, how the work on the ground needs to be shaped, what the context is, Greater Manchester, but also what's the strategic policy question that we really need to answer to make sure that community ownership can thrive. I've got a couple of slides that I'm going to share just to explain to you what I mean when I'm talking about community wealth building. Hopefully it's something that you've heard of, but I'm going to kind of just outline the kind of broad parameters of what I mean by a community wealth building model and where community ownership really fits into that. So I'm going to try and share my screen with you. And hopefully we've got some slides there. Is everyone? Can anyone see the slides?
We've got the PowerPoint showing. The slideshow's not started yet, but there we go.
Yeah, showing. Yeah. Okay, so community wealth building. We argue it's an alternative approach to local economic development. It's an approach which is rooted in building your economy from within and making the most of all your assets that you have within your economy, be those capital assets, be those human assets, be those environmental assets. So it's very much an economic approach which you can build from within, which therefore means it's less reliant on investment and capital from outside. Those flows of inward investment that we have typically tried to chase to bring to our economy. Now, community wealth building is built up, our model is built up from these 5 different pillars of activity. The first pillar is around commissioning and procurement, and essentially what we're looking at is spending. Where do we spend our money in the local economy? Who do we spend it with? And why do we spend it with those people? It critically starts to look at where we have to go outside of our local economy to make our purchases and our spending decisions, and starts to ask questions around why that decision has to be made. Why can our local economy not service our own needs? And we typically work with large institutions to start to answer this question. We bring them together collectively to start really questioning where and why do they spend money, and how could they think of that spending through a lens of the local economy. The second pillar that we talk about is employment. We talk about fair employment and just labour markets. And we look at the terms and conditions that people are operating within our local labour market. How can we support an improvement in those conditions? How can we improve the types of jobs that are on offer? How can we improve progression within work for those in low-paid employment? And how can we collectively work together to support a fairer and more just labour market? Collectively, the institutions of a place also have significant control over many assets, including land and property, plenty of buildings, plenty of pieces of land that could be utilised in different ways. How do we look at land and property through the lens of the local economy and supporting local community wealth building? If we're going to build a local economy, it's going to need money, it's going to need capital, it's going to need finance. And as we know, the banking industry is increasingly moved away from the local. It's only concerned with those global flows of capital. So how do we develop alternative financial mechanisms that really work for our local places? And we're seeing lots of innovative use of new financial instruments, local government bonds, share capital, community shares, all these types of different ways of raising capital to support activity within a local economy. And our ultimate ambition really within community wealth building is to use these four pillars to harness and to grow the fifth, which is increasing local and community ownership of the economy. We typically work with major institutions of place to bring together the sticky capital, so the financial, the economic, the intellectual, social, and human capital of all these types of major institutions. Hospitals have always thought of themselves as delivering health outcomes. Universities deliver educational outcomes. But actually, these are huge institutions within the local economy, and they have significant power. What we do with community wealth building is try to harness the collective power to shape the local economy. What we're attempting to do is to build what we call a more generative economy. So our argument is that our economy has become too far balanced towards the extractive nature. It's where the inward investment comes into an economy with an expectation that it's going to extract its profits from that economy. It does little to support local people and local wealth. At the more generative end of the economy, we've got our local SMEs. They employ their staff locally. Their senior staff live locally. They buy their products and services locally. The money they spend gets recirculated within the local economy. And then as you move into more socially minded business models, social value becomes default. It's what they do as their day job. They support those furthest from the labour market. They support activity in their local communities. They support the most vulnerable, and they help people into employment. So it's this social end of the economy which is going to help us build more wealth. But the question is, how do we build that community ownership of our economy? So we've got three speakers today who are going to help us explore this question. We've got three speakers, and we're going to start with Christine Berry, who is an independent author and researcher, an associate fellow at IPPR North. And she's going to talk to us today about the work that she's been doing around democratic ownership. Let me just stop sharing my screen and invite Christine to unmute.
Hi there.
Hi, Christine. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. So you've been described variously to me as one of the central figures in the new left economic movement. And your work focuses on how we build a new economic and political settlement. Now, I know you're writing a book at the moment, so can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, sure. I am somehow still writing a book. Feels like I've been writing it for about 1 billion years now. I think that's how it works when you're writing a book. So I'm told this is my first, so I wouldn't know. But yeah, it's about democratic ownership. So the kind of basic starting point of the book really is building on some of what you were just saying, actually, the idea that generally people that do well in the UK economy today, by and large, are doing well because they own stuff rather than because they do stuff. So it's not that they're kind of producing wealth or creating value. They're basically extracting rents because they own or control valuable assets that other people need to use. And, you know, like landlords, they're able to use their position as gatekeepers to those assets to extract rents from other people in the economy. So that might be literal landlords, you know, people that own land and property assets. It might be companies like Google and Facebook that control our data or control digital platforms that we rely on. It might be people that control crucial infrastructure like energy or water or care services. Or even the money supply itself. So the chapter I'm working on at the moment actually is on money and banking. Some of the things that you were just talking about how, you know, we have a financial system that's not focused actually on supporting productive activity in communities. It's focused on sort of playing games with, you know, globally with increasingly complicated financial instruments that kind of creates risk in the global economy rather than creating value. So yeah, it's quite a broad canvas. But what I'm trying to do in the book really is firstly, to kind of set out why that matters. I think it matters for the economy. You know, you can see it in the cost of living crisis. One of the reasons that living is so expensive in this country is because of these kind of rentier dynamics. And it also matters for democracy, I think, because people that control those assets get to decide what to do with them. You know, and I think that is a problem if we want to build a more democratic economy. This is where kind of community ownership comes in, maybe. So in the book, I kind of explore various different ways that we could reclaim control collectively of these kind of assets at community level, at local level, both through kind of different forms of community ownership and through the local and the national state. So from community-led housing to mutual banks to platform co-ops. So yeah, that's what my head is in at the moment.
It sounds like you're covering a lot in this book.
Yeah, one of my interviewees described it as ridiculously broad and ambitious. I was like, can I put that on the cover? That is how it feels most of the time. It's an insane endeavor, but it should be coming out next year with Verso Books. So there's my plug. Yeah, keep an eye out for that, for my ridiculously broad and ambitious book.
Which bit of research have you done recently that's really kind of shocked you or inspired you, or something that you've learned new?
So the thing that really shocks me and that always gets me absolutely raging, actually, of all the issues that I've looked at for the book, is the care sector. And, you know, people may be familiar with this just from kind of things that seeped into the consciousness that, you know, big news events like a few years ago when we had Four Seasons or Southern Cross, you know, big care home chains that collapsed. It's utterly baffling to me that anyone thinks it's acceptable for these big private equity owned chains to be in control of care homes that house elderly and vulnerable people, or actually increasingly in charge of nurseries that look after, I mean, I've got a 3-year-old, and the idea that these people should be allowed anywhere near babies and toddlers is just mind-blowing to me. You know, their entire business model is extraction. They don't, and this is what's kind of shocking to me about it. It's basically about owning property and leveraging property assets and playing games of property. That's why they're interested in care homes and nurseries. The activity that goes on inside the building is kind of a bit of a sideshow as far as their business models are concerned. The only way in which it's relevant to their business models is A, it's a very reliable stream of rent because it's an essential service. People need childcare, people need social care, they always will. So there's a very reliable stream of fees. And B, they want to kind of reduce their wage bill, the labour costs of that activity as much as they can, squeezing the staff that are actually providing that care so that they can extract more value from the business, usually to kind of pump up the value of the business so that they can then sell it on in this kind of pass parcel game to some other